All right, we are back on our land, back on the farm, and today's visit we have one of the most well-trusted experts on food forests here in Costa Rica, our friend Scott plants trees. And today, so since your last visit, you kind of walked us through, the basics of planting a tree, where to plant it, and you kind of gave us an overview of what to do.
Yeah.
And now we planted all the trees in place. And my main concern with this visit is making sure we really get, really healthy trees for long term. And so the plants are in the ground. How do we make sure they live and thrive and grow healthily? I really have no idea. I'm still a beginner, and so I wanted to make you come in here. Not make you. I didn't make you do this, did I?
It's Sunday. So there was some peer pressure.
So what I do know is that fruit trees need nitrogen, phosphate, potassium.
Yep.
And so what are your recommendations for, feeding our fruit trees the nutrients they need to make sure they thrive? I really want to get into that.
All right, so today's a soils day. All right, we're going to try to not get too complex. The key to all of this, like the key to life, like on a really broad level, is the act of this leaf right here as a solar panel, collecting sunlight, and through the process of photosynthesis, turning that into carbon, into sugars. And the most interesting thing that's happening is that those sugars, a large percentage of them, it's something like 80 to 90%, actually go down into the roots and are excreted to the roots to feed the soil fungal, bacterial, the soil food web, all the microorganisms in the soil. All of those guys in the soil, particularly the fungi, they're the ones that make the nitrogen work, make the phosphorus work, make the potassium work, all of our essential macro and our micronutrients. And so when we think about this system, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a system that optimizes photosynthesis. We're trying to collect as much sunlight as possible. And we're trying to turn that sunlight into food for the microorganisms, which will then take everything that's available in the soil and send it back to the plant. One of the misconceptions, and we don't know if this is the case here, but in general, the soil has almost everything that plants need to thrive. And we know that because if you guys didn't do anything on this land here, in a few years, it would be a happy, healthy forest. Everything's here for the trees to work. What usually happens, though, is in a monoculture setting or a setting where we're applying some sort of pesticide or synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, is that the soil life just dies and that whole process gets cut off. And so then we have to bring in something from the outside. If you apply nitrogen fertilizer, it tells all of them that there's plenty of nitrogen in the system, and they stop working and their populations plummet. And so what actually happens is that the more nitrogen fertilizer you apply, the system's ability to produce its own nitrogen diminishes and diminishes and diminishes until you're in a sterile, nearly sterile soil environment. And it's a horrendous negative feedback loop that most modern farmers are stuck in.
If we just plant this, it already has the nutrients it needs in the soil: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We don't need to bring in anything from outside.
That's the most up-to-date theory on soil is that. Now, if your soil is heavily degraded, that's a different thing. And these soils are degraded soils. This was a poorly managed plot. It's on a steep slope. We can assume erosion's been happening here. They've been tilling it. And so we do want to bring in stuff. What it probably needs more than anything else is a single application of like a rock phosphate or a rock dust. Here in Costa Rica, an more or less easy thing to purchase is rock phosphate, and it's approved for organic certification. You apply it once to your land, and you really shouldn't have to ever apply it again. We talk about the 3 M's for soil fertility: minerals, microorganisms, and organic material. So our minerals are going to be like rock phosphate, like crushed stone. Microorganisms we might bring in the form of like a bokashi, like a really highly charged, kind of like a form of compost. You guys are already applying mountain microorganisms. So
we already applied bokashi. With every fruit tree we planted, we sprinkled on top bokashi.
So you've already done like a microorganism boom. We've got organic material going on here with our mulch. Yeah, you might want to consider adding a mineral component, which again, I would recommend buy probably a single sack of rock phosphate, which is going to cost you like $30, $35 now, would work for the whole property. This plant's going to thrive in a community with other plants. And so what we want to think about is what other plants, ideally from a diverse set of plant families, can we plant around this, in the general vicinity, in a row here, maybe filling in between these other plants. What will happen is each of those plants and its roots is going to have a different microbiome. And that's like all of the life in the soil that works with that plant. And they will fill different niches. And what they start to do is they start to make different nutrients that are in your soil bioavailable. And they actually start working together in this full, like, beautiful synergy and form of cooperation. Basically, we come back to the principle of diversity. The diversity of plants growing in this system at different heights, so they don't compete with each other for sunlight, is what's going to really kind of trigger this and get it going.
And is this like stemming from the principle of just imitating the forest?
Yeah,
that's what clicked for me. Is like, I think we're just imitating the forest here.
100%. There's studies now, again, that are identifying that having a minimum of 4 plant families creates this self-organizing functional ecosystem that reduces pest incidence, increases nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon cycling, improves soil aggregation, all these things. What I would do is I would fill this row with additional plants. And so I would look for things that are going to grow high. I would look for things that stay low and cover the ground. And I would really try to fill this with plants.
What would be an example of what we would plant around the cinnamon, just so people get an idea?
I think things like herbs are great. So look what you have an abundance of. So if you have a lot of lemongrass, and we can get a couple of cepas of lemongrass in here, you could start working in things that are even shorter term rotation. So things like corn, beans, squash. I can very much imagine you taking this to the next level, these rows here. How do we take this to its fullest form? If we're dedicated to an agriculture that imitates the forest, what is happening in the syntropic farming methodology is that at its full potential. And that's interesting to me. You know, I was just in Brazil, and what I saw, for example, is you would have a tree like this jackfruit, and right next to it would be a cacao.
No way.
Right next to that, and here, I'm not exaggerating, would be an avocado.
I don't believe you, because the cacao actually gets like this big when it gets big, but wouldn't they be touching each other, the trunks?
You ever walk through the forest? How many big trees do you see that are touching each other, literally?
Yeah, I should go walk through the forest and see what's happening in there. What this means is revolutionary with people with like smaller farms. Because when we came to Costa Rica, we were like, yeah, we need a big farm. We need maybe at least a hectare. But with this, you're kind of like pushing things together. And so that 1,000, 2,000 square meter property all of a sudden turns into like this huge food forest potential.
It fits within the permaculture concept of intensive use of space. And if that means I can grow multiple fruit trees in a really high density space through really good pruning and light management, well, yeah, maybe I don't need a hectare. Maybe I only need 2,000 square meters to meet my need. And that means there's more land for somebody else, or simply more land for forest. And then if we want to take this to the next level, we would probably put in some even taller things. So we put in some trees that we're going to prune eventually at like 5 or 6 meters, and we're going to drop those down for mulch, because we're interested in systems that are going to produce this for us forever.
Right.
And within a very close distance. Pick a row or a group of trees and really fill that with additional plants.
And so, with this newfound knowledge of soil fertility and syntropic farming, I got to work. First, I started planting a diversity of plants around our fruit trees. Instead of having just one singular tree, I now know having a diversity of plants really boosts the soil life, creating a functional ecosystem whilst reducing pest incidents. Next up, beside our trees, I started planting timber trees and taller trees. Basically, what I'm doing here is planting our own mulch factory. As the trees grow taller, I will be pruning them, dropping their branches and leaves below to mulch our fruit trees and to feed the soil life. Not only is pruning these trees good for mulch, but also as we prune these trees, they will want to grow back strongly, and as they are strongly growing back, it releases hormones into the soil that drive the surrounding plants into higher production and activates defenses in the plants against pests and diseases. Not to mention that in 20 years, these timber trees can also be used as wood for building. For now, I don't think I will be turning our whole land into a syntropic food forest. However, I am going to be experimenting with a few rows first to see how it goes. It definitely seems promising, and it will be really fun to see how it turns out, and of course the learning journey along the way. Cheers to all of you out there passionate about planting fruit trees and growing an abundance of fresh organic food for your family and community. With global food supply chains collapsing and big agricultural monopolies taking over, We need as many people planting food forests now more than ever.